A Nigerian journalist, Sam Omashe, who's admittedly well regarded by a sizable chunk of the newspaper reading public, just last week wrote an opinion piece which effectively sought to mollify the character of one of the men seeking to run for president of Nigeria, Peter Obi of the Labour Party. Consequently, Mr. Obi's supporters on social media, on Twitter and other social media, took offense and have been reacting furiously to what they considered an over-the-top attempt at character assassination and tribal profiling of an ex-governor seeking to exercise his fundamental right as a Nigerian. In the wake of those reactions, Mr. Omashe has turned round to play victim, claiming that his life is being threatened. Well, joining us now to look at cyberbullying ahead of 2023 election is David Hundeyin, a writer, investigative journalist, and broadcaster whose work has appeared on CNN, The African Report, The New Yorker Magazine, and The Washington Post. We expect to ask him what role is expected of political influencers as the next general election approaches. Good morning, David.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us. Well, this is your turf, and we know that you are a big player on social media, online generally. Let's discuss what Nigerians should do as we're preparing for the next round of elections, as far as cyberbullying and the increasing, digital aggression is concerned in Nigeria. What would be your opinion and what's your assessment of what's going on so far?
My assessment so far is that there exists a particular demographic of people who are a bit taken aback at the fact that this isn't 2015 and some certain tactics that used to work in 2015 aren't working anymore. And the reason is simple. The reason is there are more people online now. The internet space has matured a bit over the past 7 years. It's always easy to forget that mass high-speed internet access in Nigeria for most people is a reality that is less than a decade old. Statistically, most of Nigeria only came online within the past decade. So there were certain sort of early adopters who sort of jumped on the trend early on, and they rode the crest of the wave. 2013 and 2015 to very great effect. Some appointments, you had your Tolo policies, that demographic. But the thing is, that was always going to be a one-time deal. That was always going to be a limited offer, a limited event, because eventually what was always going to happen was that as internet access became more accessible to everyone, became cheaper and faster, as it has done in Nigeria, then there was always going to be a whole mass of people who were going to come in. And then there's no longer that monopoly of narrative that used to exist 7 or 8 years ago. So, and this ties into the Sam Omashe conversation that is going on, where 7 or 8 years ago, the people who now want to act as if they are being attacked or they are being victimized, their lives are in danger, blah, 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 they were doing some really, really, really nasty stuff back then. But because there just weren't enough people who could push back on anything back then, and also partly because the political conversation then was a bit different to the one now. Back then, the then president, Goodluck Jonathan, was, for whatever reason, was genuinely unpopular. People actually wanted him out. So it was easier for certain things to fly at the time, even things that were objectively wrong. I remember very clearly, very vividly, 2014, witnessing a spectacle of people doing what they called a political campaign. And that political campaign was to take a life-size replica of a coffin and then put a picture of the then president on it with his name and carry it around saying RIP. That was one of the most incendiary sort of political symbolisms that I've ever seen in my life. And apparently those things could fly then, and it wasn't a problem then. But now, because a small part of that same energy is being returned, when the same characters are trying to reprise the things they did in 2015, all of a sudden they can't take what they spent 7 years giving out. I remember Sam Omaseye himself, 2014, at one of those political rallies come protest things that they used to do, where he held up a goat and put a placard around the goat's neck and said, "My name is Jonathan," on the placard. Sam Omaseye did that. So I find it really sort of hilarious now that apparently he's supposed to be the victim in all of this, especially given that the article in question wasn't just an article, because he's trying to characterize it now as if, I just gave my opinion and these awful internet bullies are jumping down my throats. But what he's not saying is that what was the headline of the article? The headline of the article was OB and then hyphen TUARY. Like, what is that supposed to mean? What message were you trying to pass across when you did that? Was that what a respectable newspaper columnist does when he's writing a headline? What message was that supposed to be passing across? How was that edifying in anything? So he obviously dipped his foot into the water, and then he came out bloodied, and all of a sudden now he thinks he's being persecuted because he's basically getting a very tiny portion of the same energy that he spent 7 years giving out. So I have very little sympathy for people like that, particularly given the background that I come from in marketing communication, where I actually worked in the industry at the time in 2015, the marketing communications industry at the time. Thankfully, the agency I worked at didn't do political work, but I had friends and colleagues who were involved in the campaign, and I saw at very close quarters what they called the campaign, what it actually meant. I always like to point out to people, for example, that on election day in 2015, if you remember, I don't know if you remember, but if you were on social media at the time, specifically Twitter, I think for 48 straight hours, election day and the day after in 2015, the two top trending words on Twitter were words that were making reference to a particular ethnic group from the Southeast, right? Those were not organic trends, right? It wasn't that people were just talking about a certain tribe in Nigeria. That's not what happened. Those were artificial paid trends. And I was in the room actually when someone was using a platform called AdDynamo to artificially create, because back then it was possible to do that on Twitter. You could pay and you would get trends created artificially for you, right? And the word Igbos was trended artificially for 48 hours on Twitter as a pejorative term. That's what some people called a campaign in 2015. They tried to set the country on fire, right? They literally tried to spark ethnic warfare as part of a campaign to win the presidency. And yes, they won the presidency. I mean, I personally thought it was a Pyrrhic victory, and I think history has borne me out on that. So I just think that there's a certain class of people right now who have lost any kind of moral justification to have anything to say about cyberbullying or people being nasty to them on the internet, because the truth is they were the ones who created this entire ecosystem. They were the ones who made it such that this type of political energy on the online space exists now. Prior to 2012,
Right,
2015,
David, let me just come in on you there.
Exist.
Firstly, thank you for joining us on the morning show, and thank you for your answer there, because it was quite explanatory and it did tick a lot of boxes in terms of justifying or at least explaining how this monster, the internet, came to be. But David, you are no secret to tussling on the streets of Twitter too. Many people would call you a hypocrite for what you've just said. Many people would accuse you of sharing the same types of half-truths or even falsehoods when it comes to attacking political figures. Many people would call you a cyberbullier. If we look at your comments, for example, against other journalists, Kiki Mordi, who shot to fame in the aftermath of the BBC Sex for Grades documentary. It wasn't too long ago that I remember seeing you on Twitter accusing her of being a fraud. You accused her of taking credit for a documentary, that same Sex Brigades documentary, away from someone you believe was the actual proprietor of that work. Somebody, just a second, David, someone called Oge Obi. Now, Miss Obi did receive a 5 million naira payout from the BBC, but do you believe that that justifies your criticism and your behavior of other people on the same internet that you just condemned?
Well, I get the impression you didn't really know what you're talking about when you made that comment now, because everything I said about Kikimodi is actually documented facts, right? And in fact, there's a story coming. Well, let me not preempt myself.
Go ahead, tell
there
us.
will be a story coming out about that later. So,
Alrighty.
to be honest, I would say you should pretty much stick to the facts, right? Because that's what I try to do. Obviously, the way I come across isn't everybody's cup of tea, but the one thing that no one can accuse me of is being a liar, right? You can accuse me of being aggressive, accuse me of even being a bully if you like, that's fine. But the one thing I don't do is go on the internet and tell lies or half truths, as you put it. So if you're going to sort of throw these things at me, it would be good to sort of put like a solid example or two of a time when I actually said something that wasn't true.
These are questions.
Because that's something
we're not in a court here. These are questions. There's no court. I'm asking you, seeing that you spoke so much about the internet and cyberbullying, it is fair to also put the question to you that you too have also been accused of cyberbullying, and you've responded to that, saying that everything you've said about Kiki Modi, for example, which was an example of those types of criticism, you say that that's true. So you've been able to defend yourself amicably, but you are not exempt from being asked questions on this type of topic. I hope you don't feel as though you're exempt from being able to receive those types of questions.
Again, the fact that some people will say something doesn't necessarily mean anything. I mean, I can say that 2 + 2 is 3. Doesn't mean that my opinion has value just because I said it.
I understand that, David, and I don't want to get personal, even though I also there are a number of things that are concerning, but your views are valid, as far as the subject matter is concerned. If I were to take it from what Adefemi was saying, she mentioned Kiki Modi, I would, there are a few other people that I could mention and ask about why your fixation about colleague journalists, to the Toyosi Ogushe's cases there are many other cases. I can understand when you're using the social media and technology, to expose some truths, but then people might wonder the direction in which such exposes.
Yeah, and what I would say is people shouldn't join the conversation halfway through, because that's like reading a book and starting in the middle. So if you're looking at certain engagements and you probably don't get why someone engages a certain way or why someone engages with certain people a certain way, it's always a good idea to go back and see what started it off, where it came from. So, for example, in the case of Thursday, I really don't want to sort of spend an hour talking about myself, my personal beefs here, because I don't think that's why I came here. But in the case of Thursday, for example, if you'd have checked, you'd have seen that there's a reason why I felt like this particular person needs to be called out, because this lady dropped a bomb into several people's lives, including mine, by the way, by extension, destroyed journalistic careers because of sort of office politics, that the toxic brand of
those are the claims that
this was something that needed to be put out, and also because obviously bearing in mind that I'm one of the few people who's lucky enough in the journalism space to be functionally independent, so I can say things that other people can't because they're afraid of losing their jobs or whatnot. So there's a certain responsibility that comes with that. So there are even some things that I know that somebody wants this thing to be put out, but they're afraid to put it out. They won't even ask me, and I will take it on myself to do that because I'm the one who is fortunate enough to be in a position to do that. So again, I'm not saying that I'm a saint or anything, or that I've never done anything wrong on the internet. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I am saying is that 9 times out of 10, there's a very solid reason why I choose to engage the way I do.
Okay, one of the key things that you have always said is that if people are uncomfortable with your kind of reportage and truth, that they should, seek redress in court. I want to expand that to say that as we inch closer to 2023 on the political space, how much of legislation do you think can curb the sort of toxic, cyberbullying that we are likely to witness? You've talked about the Sam Omasheye thing, but we know that because there is ethnic consideration in the presidency, in those who are going for presidency. Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu is Yoruba, Atiku Abubakar is Hausa, Peter Obi is Igbo. We can't run away from that reality, and therefore it is possible that the sort of vitriol that might come up will have ethnic slurs and stuff. How much of legislation do you think can protect victims, especially those who are targeted by cyberbullying?
So I don't think that's a thing that can be solved by legislation, because I think specifically under this government, legislation for such a purpose would be a very dangerous thing. We're talking about the government that banned Twitter here. So I don't think this is the kind of government that we want to be given any kind of power. I mean, after the Twitter ban, I was part of a lawsuit that challenged the legality of the Twitter ban, and a few days ago, the ECOWAS court ruled in our favor and restrained the government from doing such a thing again, at least on paper. So that's kind of like the Nigerian reality we have, not this administration. So I'm not sure that these are the guys that you want to give that kind of executive power to. I don't think they would. They are the sorts of people who know how to handle power well, pretty much. So I think, to be honest, in as much as you don't want to hear this, the genie is already out of the bottle. Genie was let out of the bottle in 2013, arguably. So there's just no getting away from it now. This is the monster that certain people created, right? And we're just going to have to. I mean, I find it funny that we're spending a lot of time talking about cyberbullying, political cyberbullying now in 2022, when the truth is that compared to what the situation was back in 2014, this campaign is actually quite tame so far. I'm not sure how engaged you were between 2013 and 2015 period. That was a truly dreadful time. Like, it was truly dreadful. The things that were happening on the internet used to spill over into the offline world as well. People were getting calls at work. People were losing their jobs because of the engagements on social media. Like, it was genuinely awful. People were meeting offline to trade blows, to fight. That's what it was back then. Like that. So compared to then, now is actually pretty tame. So I don't think now is when we should really be talking about like trying to legislate righteousness into people's hearts or anything. I think the genie is already out of the bottle. I think we just have to sort of learn how to deal with it. And to be honest, the people who created this entire conversation, who made things this way, I feel as if they would very much like for us to have a conversation about how we can sort of get the government to step in and make everything stop, right? Because that's what bullies do. Bullies are cowards at heart, right? They love to give out what they can't take. But I strongly believe that if you give something out, you should be able to take it. So like even in my case, for example, I acknowledge that I lay it on a bit thickly sometimes, and I'm also not afraid to take it when I lay it on thickly. So you will never see me do something like maybe lock my comments or something. I never do that. If I give it out, I should always be willing to take it. Like I think that's fair. So the people who spent 2014 hanging placards around the necks of goats saying this is Jonathan, or who did a whole animated TV series that just absolutely eviscerated the man, and those same people will not dare to do such a thing now for fear of getting fined 5 million naira by Lai Mohammed. I don't think those are the people that are the moral arbiters. of what we should and shouldn't do right now. I think they've had their time and it's gone. They've showed that this was all that they were worth. All they were looking for was just access to power. Now that they have the power, and they ended up working for an administration that banned Twitter and shot young people at Lekki toll gate and just committed all sorts of atrocities, they are willing to go along with it and they don't have a problem. So, which means they never really had any kind of moral center or ethical core. Anyway, it was all about just trying to win, nothing more. So I really don't think those are the people that I'm going to be getting my moral direction from. So unfortunately, yeah, just deal with it, really.
All righty, David, I do want to get your thoughts on sharing platforms with terrorists. You, or obviously, I'm sure you'd be well aware of a documentary that was released around a week or so ago that gave clear, visible access to a purported terrorist in Nigeria, in Zamfara. And off the back of that documentary, there was a mix of reactions. On the one hand, you had representatives of the government and even a journalist, Kadaria Ahmed, who said that platforms should not be given to terrorists. And then you've got other people on the other side who don't think that being able to see a terrorist and hear what they've said justifies their behavior. Where do you come in? Where do your opinions lie on that matter?
I believe that whenever we're having that kind of conversation, the sort of environmental nuances should come into play. In our case, we live in a country where our government is more notional than a reality. We have a government in a notional sense. It's not really that functional. So a lot of the time we find that even as I'm sure you get this too, that as a journalist, people almost kind of expect you to be their government, sort of. People come to you with their problems. Like sometimes you don't even understand what you're supposed to do with those problems, but people just do that because there is very little state capacity in functional sense. So in that sort of scenario, I can completely understand why it falls to journalists a lot of the time to do certain types of engagement, to tell stories that would not otherwise be told. And I mean, if we were living in America, then Kader Ahmed might have had a point. Because if we were living in America and then some guy flew to Afghanistan to have a conversation with the Taliban and humanize them or whatnot, then you would say, why? What is your motivation for doing that? What on earth could you possibly stand to gain to do that? But the truth is, we don't live in America, we live in Nigeria, right? A country where the truth is that if you are going to be traveling by road from Lagos to Zamfara, that terrorist that Yusuf was in the video with is more likely to be able to protect you than the police or the military. That's just the fact. So if we're in that kind of situation, I don't think it's the state, which has so woefully failed to exert its own presence, really, has the right to say that so and so shouldn't be happening, so and so should happen. Because where was the state in all of this? If the state was doing its job to start with, there wouldn't have needed to be such a documentary. Yusuf wouldn't have needed to go into a forest to meet a bandit leader in Zamfara, because the bandit leader in Zamfara wouldn't have existed. The government would have taken care of it. So the fact that Yusuf, who is someone I know personally, by the way, is just like an ordinary civilian, right, was able to walk into a forest and gain access to people that the government apparently is completely, like, its hands and feet are tied. It cannot do anything about. I think it's a major indictment on the state itself. And I think people like Kadaria, I mean, I've already expressed what I think her motivations are, so I don't think there's any need to say it on air again. But I'll just say that, like, people who look at the reactions of people like Kadaria need to understand that sometimes the messenger is sometimes as important as the message. So even if what she's saying appears to make sense on the surface, you should always understand that certain people always have an angle that they're working. There's a reason why they're saying it. In her case, it's very clear to my eyes that anyone who is an in-law of someone who came out openly in public and said that he paid money to bandits to make them stop. He essentially admitted giving material support to terrorists, right? Anyone who's an in-law of that person is hardly going to be overjoyed that, Yusuf is going into the forest and doing actual journalism and telling people the real story of what is going on, so that people will understand that whatever material support that Nasir El-Rufai gave to those terrorists was used to kill and kidnap more Nigerians. That's all that happened. Obviously, she's not going to be pleased about that. She has a vested interest in all of this, and it's part of the reason why, to begin with, I don't really believe that one can actually be a journalist and at the same time be very close to power. I don't believe it. I believe that people in power and journalists are the proverbial cat and mouse, and that's how it's supposed to be. That's supposed to be the relationship between journalism and power. We're not supposed to be friends. So I feel like if you're supposed to be a journalist and your brother-in-law is a sitting governor, I don't think you can honestly describe yourself as a journalist. You can be a media practitioner, which I think is what Kader Ahmed is, or you can be a PR practitioner. I don't think you can be a journalist, because are you going to hold yourself accountable, which is what journalism is about? It's about holding people accountable, holding power accountable. Is she going to hold her brother-in-law accountable? So I just feel as if, people should be a bit less disingenuous when they offer comments about certain issues in public, right? And if you absolutely have to take a position in public because obviously you have an interest, then you should be bold enough or brave enough to state what your interest is, own it in public, and sort of don't insult people's intelligence.
All right, David, I mean, we're practically, out of time, but, it's interesting that, every time that one thinks that, we wouldn't have to go into personalities, but then, even when you said that's not what you intend to do, but it ends up being a direct or indirect, attack on persons. But again, that's your opinion. Just last quick one in few seconds. Do you think that this election 2023 will be fought and won on social media? How much of influence do you think social media will have on the outcome of the 2023 general elections? Just in a few seconds, please.
To be honest, I think the thing that will have the greatest influence on the outcome of the elections isn't social media. It's actually INEC. I think it's actually INEC. The ability to deploy materials as the when due, the ability to stay neutral if when it's called for, the ability to maintain a certain level of network fidelity so that results can be broadcast, that sort of thing. I think those are the logistical issues that will actually have the greatest influence on the election. Because if we're going by social media alone, I think you can already pick out a winner. Unfortunately, that's not how real life works. Sometimes the person who is very popular, both online and offline, doesn't end up being the winner, because even offline, it's not everybody who is politically active offline who ends up going to the polling booth on the day to put their thumb on the paper. Unfortunately, that's just how it works. It's not as if they don't want to. In many cases, they haven't even been able to collect their PVCs, even though they registered. David, so I think INEC is the sort of breaking point.
All right.
David Hundeyin, thank you very much for joining us on the morning show.